I read 20 books in May, so let's talk about them. I feel like May was a really fun month because I had some really good reads, but also some flops, and obviously some that were just kind of in the middle. So I'm excited to talk about all of these. Also, can we just note that I read 7 out of the 8 books on my TBR this month, which is a record for me. I've never read 8 out of 8. I have done 7 out of 8 once before, but I'm proud of that. So thumbs up for sticking to our TBR. We don't always do it, but sometimes we do. So starting off with one of the books that was on my TBR, or I might actually talk about these two at the same time because they are part of the same series. It's by Tahereh, who is also the author of the Shatter Me series, and this is going to be a trilogy. I think the next book comes out in February 2024. Don't quote me on that, I think that's what it is. For those of you who don't know, this is YA fantasy and there is a romance subplot, and the romance subplot is pretty significant. Basically, in the first book we meet Eliza, but she is a lost heir. So she was supposed to be royalty, but something happened with her parents, something happened with her family, and now she is basically in hiding. So she should be a princess, but now she's basically a servant and is just trying to make it by, I guess. Trying to live a very low-key life, not let anyone kind of figure out who she is. And then we have Cameron, and he is the prince, so he is the heir to the throne, and somehow the two of them come into contact, and Cameron is like, there is something about this girl and he can't get her out of his head. And obviously he has no idea who she is or that she is kind of royalty, but he just can't stop thinking about her. He's like, there is something about this girl, I need to figure out what it is, she's so mysterious. And so he's trying to basically figure out who she is, kind of uncover a little bit of that mystery. And then in the story there's this bad guy called Cyrus, and he is kind of an enemy to Cameron, and there's a whole lot of stuff going down with that. But that's your basic premise. I will say the first book is pretty much 500 pages, and I'm kind of like, what actually happened in this besides world building? But in saying that, I really enjoyed it. The 500 pages for me went by so quickly, and then I went straight into the second book, and this one went by so quickly as well, and this one's a little bit shorter, I think. These kind of had a rom-com feel to them at a lot of points for me. It's very interesting because they're very high stakes. This is life or death we're talking about. This is heir to the throne, political intrigue, all of that sort of stuff, and there were so many moments where I was just literally laughing out loud. It was just so funny to me. It didn't feel like high stakes even though it was, and I mean that in a good way. I ended up rating these both 4 stars because I honestly had a lot of fun during my reading experience, but upon reflection I'm like, what actually happened in these books, especially this one? I wouldn't say these books have the strongest plot, at least at this point, and both of them I think end on cliffhangers, and obviously the third book isn't out yet, so part of me is kind of like, is it even worth recommending these to you guys if the third book's going to come out in February and you could just read them all back to back then and not have the cliffhangers, kind of get all the answers to the questions, because I'm kind of frustrated that I don't know what's going to happen next. So part of me is like, if you don't like cliffhangers or if you don't want to have unanswered questions, maybe just wait till the next book comes out and read them all at once. But I had a lot of fun, and at the end of the day that's what reading is about, so I'm not mad at these two, and they're also just gorgeous paperbacks. I love how these look sitting next to each other, and I can't wait to see what the third one looks like because they're just such beautiful covers. Next, I read the entire War of Lost Hearts trilogy by Carissa Broadbent, so Daughter of No Worlds, Children of Fallen Gods, and Mother of Death and Dawn. I think those are the right titles. I read them all on my Kindle because they're all free on Kindle Unlimited for my KU girlies out there. And if you guys have been paying attention, I've actually already read the first book before. I read Daughter of No Worlds, I think maybe in January, definitely at the start of this year, but I just never continued the trilogy, and I don't really remember why. And so obviously because Carissa Broadbent has just been getting so much hype on the internet, I was like, oh, maybe I should continue that series that I've already started. I know she has the Serpents and Wings of the Nights series as well, but I was kind of like, I may as well finish the one that I've already started. So for those of you who don't know what Daughter of No Worlds is about, because obviously I can't explain the plot of the next two because that would just be major spoilers, it is basically about a girl who is a slave and she buys herself out of slavery, kind of earns her way out, and her plan is to go join the orders where she can learn how to use her magic and kind of become a soldier, I guess, and her dream is to go back to where she was a slave and save all of the slaves there. And when she gets to the orders, she finds out that all of the mentors or the trainers already have students that they're teaching. They manage to find someone who they can get to teach her, and that is Max, and that is just where the story starts. And there is so much more to the story than that, but I feel like that's a basic rundown, that's a basic synopsis of what you need to know going in. It's crazy to think that that is where the story started by the time you finish it, because there is just so much more to the story. story than that. It's so complicated, it's so layered, it's so detailed. There's also a fantastic slow burn romance, which I absolutely loved. I honestly really enjoyed rereading the first book. I feel like I understood it so much better the second time around, because the first time I was honestly very confused. It took me a long time to wrap my head around it. In saying that though, going into the second and third books, my brain was struggling to understand and comprehend what was going on. I'm not really sure why, because I haven't really had a huge issue with understanding other fantasy books, but there was just something about these books where my brain just was not clicking, and it kind of took some of the fun out for me, I think. Like having to almost like work so hard to understand what was going on and be able to make the links that the author wants you to make, it kind of took some of the fun out of it for me. And I think it kind of, I don't want to say ruined my reading experience, because it definitely didn't ruin it. I still really enjoyed these books, but they didn't feel like 5 stars for me, because it felt like I was almost like studying for a test or something. So for that reason, I feel like I'm kind of sad that I wasn't as obsessed with this series as so many other people are. I will say I can definitely acknowledge how well done these books are, how great the character development was, how great the plot execution was. The plot point that comes in the second and third book is mind-boggling and so good, but overall it just wasn't like super fun to me. So I ended up rating the first book 4.25 stars, and then the second and third book I rated 4 stars. Again, still fantastic books. I would definitely recommend them to other people. Overall, had a lot of fun, but they're definitely not a huge favorite for me. And honestly, getting through that third book was such a struggle. It was worth it in the end because the ending was so beautiful and so well done, but it was hard. Like it felt like a marathon. I also picked up Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, and wow, this was so freaking good. I love this book so much. This book is kind of a sequel to Part of Your World. It's like interconnected standalone, so they're set in the same world but focused on different characters. So I would recommend reading Part of Your World first if you would like to. I really enjoyed Part of Your World, but I honestly might have enjoyed this one more. This centers around our female main character from Part of Your World, her best friend, who is currently going through a divorce. She is a doctor at a hospital, and then a new doctor comes to start working at that hospital, and his name is Jacob. And they kind of get off on the wrong foot. They have a bit of a bad interaction, and Jacob feels really bad about it, so he actually writes a letter to Brianna apologizing and explaining himself. He also has social anxiety, so he kind of like writes that down in the letter, like, I'm really sorry, I was not super nice. Sometimes with my social anxiety, I just kind of freeze, I freak out, I come across a little bit more standoffish than I would have liked, and I just want to apologize. And obviously Brianna reads this letter and she's like, oh my gosh, I totally misinterpreted this whole situation. I thought he was being really rude. He obviously wasn't. There was a lot more going on than I really understood. And so she writes him a note back just being like, no problem, that's so fine. And that just starts off a series of letters that they start writing back and forth to each other. There's also something that happens in this story where Jacob needs a date to something, so then there's like a fake dating situation, which I've really been enjoying fake dating recently. I just find it so fun. I feel like the social anxiety representation was phenomenal. As someone who struggles with social anxiety, this is me to a T. And I think one of the things I really loved about this story was Brianna really, like, although she couldn't understand how it feels in Jacob's head to be thinking the thoughts that he thinks, she really tries to accommodate for him and like tries to understand and tries to make things easier for him. So there's this one scene where Brianna is at one of her friends' houses and they decide to invite Jacob over, and so she's texting him the address and stuff like that, and then she walks to the front of the house and pulls out her phone, and her friend is like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm just taking a photo of the driveway so I can show Jacob where to park because he gets stressed about things like that. And I was like, the fact that she had been paying enough attention to realize that parking situations in places that he had never been to would make him stressed or anxious, so she accommodated for that and took a photo of the driveway pointing out exactly where he could park. It was so cute. Something so small that I'm sure a lot of people are just like, so, but that is just so sweet. Acts of service, you guys. Acts of service. It gets me every single time. I ended up rating this 4.5, but I think I could bump it up to a 5 stars if I continue thinking about it as much as I already have been thinking about it, because yeah, I just loved it. All right, besties, no one's gonna be surprised at this, but I also picked up Fourth Wing this month. I feel like every month there is one book that is just all over Bookstagram, all over BookTok, all over BookTube. And during May, it was definitely Fourth Wing. I think last month it was Happy Place, this month it was Fourth Wing. And you know what? This book was a lot of fun. I feel like the best way to describe this is Harry Potter meets Divergent meets How to Train Your Dragon. And honestly, if that doesn't convince you to read it, I don't know what will. So in my head, the setting, I was imagining Hogwarts because Basically, it's a magic school or a war college, technically, like they're getting trained how to be soldiers for war. But the way they described it kind of made me think of Hogwarts. They all get separated into their own, I was going to say houses, and now I'm really in the Harry Potter mindset. They're not in houses, they're in like different areas depending on what they're studying. So you can become a scribe, which is a scholar, you can become a medic, you can become a writer, and on your first day of school, that's when you choose which area you're going to go into and what you're going to study. And based on that, you have to go through a set of trials and like initiations to be able to actually make it into that part of the army. So that's where it kind of reminded me of Divergent, because they're going through these trials, these initiations, they have to obviously survive them. And in my mind, it was very reminiscent of the Dauntless initiation. And then obviously How to Train Your Dragon is because they are learning how to ride dragons. And once they find their dragon, they can telepathically communicate with them, which is so cool. So as for what this story is about, it's about a girl called Violet. She wants to be a scribe, but her mum is like, no, you have to become a rider. So she gets forced into the Riders Quadrant. But I would say the trials and the initiation was definitely like my favorite part of this book. It was so much fun. I feel like this whole book was so fast paced, and I can totally see why so many people are raving about it at the moment. I ended up rating it 4.25 stars, mostly because I loved the plot of the book, like the college setting and obviously becoming the rider and like going through all the initiations and all the dragon stuff. Like all of that was so good to me. The only part that fell flat for me was the romance, because for those of you who don't know, this is definitely like a fantasy romance. The romance is quite a large element of it, but for some reason I was just like not convinced by the romance, and I'm shocked because so many people are obsessed with the guy in this and like the romance in this. But every time there was a scene that like focused on the romance, I was kind of just like, I'm kind of bored. I just don't really care. I liked them both as individuals. I liked both of their characters. I liked the importance they both played in the story, but together I was just kind of like, I'm not convinced, and I don't know why. Honestly, without the romance, it was a 5-star book for me, but obviously the romance was quite a large part of it, so I don't really know how to feel about it because of that. And I'm just kind of sad because so many people love the romance in this, and I wish I felt the same, but I was a bit like, yeah, like it's there, like they're together and they're being romantic and stuff, but I just didn't really care about those parts, which is also really weird because I love romance. So I don't know, 4.25, still a lot of fun, still definitely recommend it. I feel like so many people would love this. I also read one non-fiction book this month. It was Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. I always struggle saying that. I honestly really enjoyed this. This is kind of a memoir. The author of this book is a therapist, and she, in this book, is going to therapy. And it's honestly so fascinating to me because you get to obviously see inside the mind of a therapist whilst she goes to therapy, and she's kind of like analyzing her own therapist. And obviously she is applying the feedback that her therapist is giving her. And she also has these really interesting clients that she talks about in this book. It has self-help elements to it if you want to apply the reflection that she has on her life to yourself, which sometimes I did. Like sometimes she said things and I was like, oh wow, I've never thought about that way, or that's a really helpful tip, I can apply that to my life. But it doesn't really have to be a self-help book, and it doesn't necessarily feel like a self-help book. It's not like, this is how you do this, 3 dot points on how you can achieve all your dreams. It's not giving that vibe. It's very much just like, if you are reading it and something kind of hits you, obviously you can apply that to your own life, but otherwise it's just reading someone else's story. And I just found it really interesting. So I definitely recommend it. I honestly flew through it in like a day. I like binged it, but I personally don't rate memoirs, so I don't have a rating for this one. I also read a few romance books this month that were just kind of mediocre for me. So one of them was Only When It's Us by Chloe Leise. I enjoyed this. This was like a solid 3-star read. It wasn't anything amazing to me, but it was fine. Like I enjoyed my reading experience, but it's not something that's probably going to stick with me for a long time. This is a college romance, and it follows 2 people who share a class together, Ryder and Willa. Willa is a college athlete. She plays soccer and she's really good. And Ryder is actually deaf, but kind of like recently deaf. And now he's just struggling with this idea of like, who am I now? And can I live a normal life? Are people going to like me? It's honestly really interesting. I really liked the representation of having a deaf main character because it's something that I've never experienced, but I also don't have anyone in my life who has experienced that. So I found it very insightful. But overall, the romance was just very like, yeah, it was fine. I also read Thank You for Listening by Julia Whelan. I actually listened to this as an audiobook because the author of this book is the audiobook narrator, and she also is an audiobook narrator like as her job. And in this story, the main character is an audiobook narrator. So it's kind of a bit of inception going on here. But overall, I quite enjoyed this. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars. If I'm remembering correctly, it follows our main character who used to be an actress and now she's an audiobook narrator. She went through an accident that kind of changed her appearance a little bit, and that has really affected her confidence and things like that because obviously as an actress previously, she was used to being on screen and on camera, and she feels like she can't do that now with the change that happened to her appearance. She doesn't feel confident enough to do that. I feel like this book touches on a lot of different things. It talks about identity and career, and obviously there's romance, but there's also family dynamics. Like, there is so much going on in this book, and I think that was one of its downfalls for me personally. Like, it was just trying to do too much in my opinion. But overall, I enjoyed the romance, I enjoyed a lot of the other aspects of this book, and I do recommend it. I finally picked up the third book in the Dreamland Billionaires series by Lauren Asher, and honestly, this was a little bit disappointing to me. I think it's my least favorite in the series, which is really sad because I thought it would be my favorite. It just fell very flat for me, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I don't know, nothing really stood out to me, nothing really hooked me, and I still enjoyed it enough. Like, it was a solid 3-star read for me, but after reading the first 2 books in the series, I think I just expected a little bit more. So a little bit sad with this one, but still solid 3 stars, so not like bad at all. Talking about slightly disappointing romances, I also picked up Irresistible by Melanie Harlow. I talked about my thoughts a little bit more in my most recent vlog, so probably check that out if you want like a more in-depth discussion. But overall, I was just like, eh. It was 2.5 stars for me. Nothing about it felt interesting to me. I didn't care about the characters at all at any point in the story, which was really sad. It was enjoyable enough to finish it and not DNF it, and that's why it's like 2.5 stars. But overall, it kind of gave me nothing. But in saying that, I know some people who love this book and love this series, so I just think it was not the book for me. So I do think some of you may enjoy it. It is single parent, small town, age gap, and it's on Kindle Unlimited. So if you like those things, maybe check it out. I also picked up When in Rome by Sarah Adams this month, and this was so fun. This is the perfect rom-com in my opinion. I think for what it is and what it was trying to be, it was perfect. It's not one of those romances where it's like so heartbreaking and has so much depth and it has you like crying by the end of it. Like, it's not like that, but for a rom-com, it gave me everything I wanted. It made me swoon, it made me laugh. I was so invested with everything to do with this story, with the characters, their own little plot lines they had going on, but also like the side characters, the family dynamics. It was funny, it was silly, it had me giggling, kicking my feet. The romance was just like the perfect amount of romance in my opinion. It was also major slow burn. It was just so freaking good and also just really wholesome. So 5 stars from me because it did exactly what it needed to do. I just had so much fun with this, and I'm so shocked at how much I enjoyed it. Like, I went into it being like, yeah, it's gonna be cute, it's gonna be fun, and I'm sure I'll enjoy it to some extent, but I was like, I heard someone compare it to the Hannah Montana movie, and I was like, kind of true. Kind of true. Basically, if you don't know what this one is about, it follows Amelia, who is a famous singer, and she is just burnt out. She feels like everyone just wants everything from her. She just has nothing left to give. She just wants to live a quiet, private life for a little bit, just kind of take a vacation. So she decides to drive to Rome, Kentucky, and while she's there, she meets Noah, and he is the classic, like, quiet, broody boy, but he's also a baker. He owns a pie shop. It's so freaking cute, and obviously things go from there. And I think if you just want something lighthearted, a cute, wholesome little rom-com, this is perfect. And I think it's pretty short too. It's just over 300 pages, so perfect. In May, I also completed my reread of ACOWAR and ACOFAS, and these were so much fun. I fully annotated both of them as well, which was also really fun. For those of you who aren't following along, I reread ACOTAR and ACOMAF last month. But why did no one tell me that rereads are this fun? Like, going back and rereading a book that you already know that you love, with characters that you already know you love, like, it is just such a great experience, and I could not recommend it enough. I actually rated both of these 5 stars, and last time I think I rated this one 4.75 and this one like 3 stars, because it's just a little novella. Like, it's not a lot, but like, they're both just so perfect that I couldn't not give them both 5 stars. Like, obviously this one definitely deserves 5 stars, like, no question about it, but also I feel like this book is so underrated. Like, I obviously understand that it's way shorter and there's not like a whole lot that happens plot wise, but in my opinion it is so necessary to bridge A Court of Wings and Ruin and A Court of Silver Flames, because there needed to be something in between. So this is just a light, fluffy, cutesy little Christmas episode of your favorite TV show, if you will, while still adding all of the setup that is needed before going into Silver Flames, in my opinion. There were just so many parts of this that I loved. I also love how much Azrael we get in this book. There are just so many like little tiny scenarios that he's in that I love. I honestly need to reread more of my favorite books because it is just so much fun and it just brought me so much joy. I also read To Kill a Kingdom this month, and this was also incredible. This is a Little Mermaid retelling, and it is about a siren princess, which is, if you don't don't know what a siren is, it's kind of like a mermaid, not quite, but like kind of. So a siren princess and the human prince. And the human prince actually just wants to be a pirate. He does not want the responsibility of being a royal or being king one day. He just wants to live on the sea. And Princess Lyra, who is the siren princess, wants nothing more than her mother's approval, and her mother is queen of the sea. And her mother basically just like never approves of anything. It doesn't matter how good Lyra is at anything. Her mum just like never seems to be satisfied. And basically something happens where Lyra gets cursed and gets basically put in a human body. And then Prince Helion, while he's out at sea being a pirate, pulls her on board because it looks like she's just like drowning in the middle of the sea. And everything kind of goes from there. It is so good. It is enemies to lovers. I will say the romance subplot is like crumbs. Like there is a tiniest little bit of romance, but it's also so good in my opinion. Like I loved the crumbs of romance. Sometimes crumbs is all you need. And I feel like it was perfect in this book. And also this is a fantasy standalone. I think there are other books that might be set in the same world or something by this author, but like so many fantasy books are part of series, trilogies, whatever it is. And so if you just want something that is a standalone, you don't want to commit to a series, please read this. 4.5 stars from me. I finally decided to pick up Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. This is the first book in the Last Hours trilogy, which is the last trilogy that I have to read in the Shadowhunters universe, which is so sad, but also so good. I am loving this. This follows the children of the characters in the Infernal Devices. It's all very complicated if you've never heard of Cassandra Clare before, and this is probably making no sense, but this series is also set in the Victorian era in London, and the vibes are immaculate. I also read this in my 24-hour readathon, and I explained a lot more of my thoughts in that as well, so I definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't already, because I kind of talk about the plot, and obviously I went into more detail about how I felt about it, but yeah, the vibes are perfect. I love the Victorian era. I love the balls and the events and the way that they talk. It's kind of giving Bridgerton a little bit. So if you think you might like that, I definitely recommend this. But I would definitely recommend reading the Infernal Devices before going into the Last Hours. I also decided to pick up another Freida Mcfadden book, so I picked up The Locked Door. Last month I read The Housemaid and The Housemaid's Secret, so I thought I'd pick up another one this month, and I rated it 2 stars. Not good. I'm kind of shocked at how bad it was because The Housemaid was so good in my opinion, and also The Locked Door on Goodreads has like a 4.0. Like it's really highly rated on Goodreads, and I'm kind of like, why? What about this book was good? Honestly, I'm surprised I even finished it. I was so close to DNFing it, but I kind of just wanted to find out what the ending was, because obviously as a thriller, you don't really know like who's responsible or like what's happening. Honestly, I'm not even going to explain the plot. In my opinion, it's a mess, but obviously a lot of other people must have enjoyed it for it to have a 4.0 on Goodreads. But in my opinion, the writing was just not it. The story was like underdeveloped. Like the writing just did not feel like a real author. It felt like I was reading like a high school student's creative writing essay that they had to write in like 2 hours, and it's like the draft, not even like the final copy. It's a pass from me. I'm definitely going to keep reading some of her other books and we'll see how we feel. But yeah, The Locked Door for me was just kind of like, nah. No. Okay, and lastly we have Heartless and Powerless by Elsie Silva, the second and third book in the Chestnut Spring series. First of all, if you don't know, I read Flawless last month in April, and I rated it 4 stars. I had a lot of fun with it. Obviously then I picked up Heartless, and I think this is my least favorite out of the series. It just, I don't know, it just wasn't for me. It had a lot of tropes that I can't really tell you because there'll be spoilers, but they just are not my favorite tropes. And so there are a lot of times where I was just kind of like, I'm not really enjoying this. But there were also other parts of the book that I really, really enjoyed. This book follows Cade and Willa. Cade works a lot on the ranch, and he's also the single dad of a boy called Luke. He's 5 years old, and now it's summer. So Luke is on summer break, and Cade needs help looking after Luke during the day because he's just like on the ranch all day. So he hires Willa as the nanny. Her and Luke just do the most random things together and just have so much fun, and I loved reading about their relationship. But the actual romance in this book just like wasn't really it for me. I don't really know why. I just didn't care. So I ended up rating this 3.5 because the romance itself was not my favorite, but like everything else I really loved. And then lastly, Powerless. I literally finished this last night. This is my last book of the month, and it was so good. After reading Heartless, I went into this not really expecting too much, and I was so pleasantly surprised, and I continued to be pleasantly surprised throughout this whole book. Jasper Jervis, I don't even know what to say about this man. Like, he had me swooning this entire book. Like, from start to finish, I just kept being like, sir? New book boyfriend for sure. For sure. He was just Wow. We all know by now that I have a type when it comes to book boyfriends. I just love a quiet, mysterious, broody boy, and Jasper is the epitome of that. And obviously with a quiet boy, usually they have a past, usually they have a really interesting and mysterious backstory, and they usually have almost like another side of their personality that you don't get to see until a lot further into the book when they just like become more comfortable with the female main character. And I just loved every side of Jasper. Like, he was just so sweet, but also such like a strong personality, but also has such a heartbreaking past. Like, the depth in this book was so incredible, especially compared to the other two books in the Chestnut Spring series. Like, I feel like the first two were just like fun romances. Like, yeah, they had like backstories, they had a bit of depth, but definitely nothing amazing. And then Powerless shows up and just like knocks the other two out of the water. Like, this one was significantly better than the first two, in my opinion. Our female main character, Sloane, in this book, I also really liked her. She's a ballet dancer, and I really loved her development throughout the story as well. Like, she had so much character development. She became so much stronger and so much more confident, and just, I don't know, she just like came into her own so much in this story, which I loved. And there was also like a whole storyline with her family that I really enjoyed, especially the ending. It was really good. I'm really tossing up whether this is a 5-star or a 4.75. I'm kind of going back and forth between the two. I don't know exactly how I feel about it yet, but either way, I really enjoyed it. I will say the Chestnut Spring series, there is a lot of spice in all of those books. Please just be aware of that, because I know that some of my audience doesn't want to read that, so there is quite a bit in these books. And I think that was honestly my only criticism with this book, was that there was just like a bit too much spice for me in the last little bit. Like, I just skipped over it. But overall, I'm in love with this man. Those are all the books that I read in May. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I feel like I've already talked for so long, so I'm gonna wrap this up quickly, but let me know your favorite book of May in the comments below. I would love to continue adding to my ever-growing TBR, but I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.